obtained accurate information about someplace else in the world where they have never been,
Right.
only telepathically and by remote viewing capabilities. Please elaborate on that.
Well, sure. So the same theory explains those things, and the paranormal just becomes normal. Those kinds of things. Remote viewing is just gathering data out of a database, and this database exists because it's required by the rendering engine that renders the virtual reality.
Could we liken the database to what's sometimes called the Akashic records in spiritual Eastern philosophies?
Yes, you see those databases are available to consciousness because consciousness is the computer. Consciousness is the player of the avatar. The body's the avatar. So if you're consciousness, this database that's made by the computer, needed for the rendering, then is available to you as consciousness because now you're in that realm. So you can remote view by getting data out of the database. You can see auras by getting data out of the database.
You send a query against the database, as the technical terms. You send a query out and you get information back.
You get information back, yes. So ancient times, people explored inner space, and fortunately, it's cheap to explore inner space. All you need is enough free time, and you can explore inner space and a will to do it. Exploring outer space is a whole lot harder. It needs a lot of very difficult technology. But exploring inner space has always been available to people. So you'll find that, yes, these Akashic records and so on were known. They didn't know why they were there. They didn't realize it was a database necessary for the rendering of the virtual reality. They didn't have any of that understanding, but they did know that they could extract data from something somehow that was non-physical, and that data would be correct. And remote viewing is if anybody still doubts that remote viewing is a real thing, well, Google it on the internet, and you'll find a lot of sites where the people are very serious and they teach remote viewing, and they do experiments, and they can show you the experiments they do, and they videotape them, and it's a very legitimate thing. And yes, the CIA had a whole staff of remote viewers, and they did some marvelous work. Several books have been written about that.
And a movie made, people staring at goats. Funny version of
it was a real funny version of that, But anyhow, of course it works. And understand, you have people who are mediums, and they, talk to dead people. Well, it's not really that the mediums are talking to dead people, but it seems like that. It appears that way to them. But this model explains what's really going on.
So that's like the signature that somebody left in their lifetime, which is added to the database, and they access that, the psychics?
No, most of the time when they have conversations with people who have passed on, they're really having a conversation with the larger consciousness system, who is
really having on the rendering that they did on that particular person.
Yeah, because they have everything. They have all the details. The consciousness made all the choices, and the rendering engine made all the physical motions. So they have all the information there, and that's available. So they're getting data out of a database, and they're getting information directly from the larger consciousness system. So that system will play that database. This is the database that defines Uncle Fred, who died 10 years ago. So there's a database that describes him, and it's a very, very detailed database, not just where he went and what he said, but everything he felt. All the consciousness data is in there too.
I would liken it to records in the database.
Yeah, records in the database.
Uncle Fred's records,
describe
from his lifetime.
Everything about him, inside and out. Consciousness and physical, and that data then is available, and the larger conscious system confines itself to playing that data set and then interacting with the medium. Because all of these exchanges between mediums and clients isn't about Uncle Fred. It's always about resolution and helping the client, the person who's still here living. That's the reason for that. That's why the system does that. Uncle Fred's gone. There is no more Uncle Fred.
Right.
But
there never was, according to you.
Yeah, there never was an Uncle. It's just like there never was an elf in World of Warcraft. There's no elves running around anywhere. Those are just pictures on a screen. Well, we're 3D pictures in a virtual reality, and that's the way our body is.
But so again, I would have to say, why would the large consciousness system make that information available to a medium if one of the tenets of your theory holds that the agent should never be able to tell that it's a virtual reality? I mean, that again seems to break.
Yeah, well, the system plays it two ways. There's two things going on here. One, the virtual reality itself needs to be always consistent, but doing things with your mind, doing things with your consciousness is outside of the system. It doesn't break the virtual reality, physical reality at all. It stays very consistent and tight. But you can use your consciousness to go outside the system. Now see, this comes from the idea that okay, in a virtual reality, the computer cannot be in the virtual reality. The computer that's computing the virtual reality can't be virtual inside the virtual reality. A virtual reality can't compute itself, so the computer has to be outside of that virtual reality. So the elf in World of Warcraft will never find in that virtual reality called, World of Warcraft, they'll never find the computer that's computing it there in a virtual space.
Supports Gödel's claim of theory.
Yes, exactly. You have to be outside. So, exactly. So the computer that computes our virtual reality has to be outside of our reality. Okay, now the player who plays the avatar also has to be outside the virtual reality. Same idea. The player makes all the choices, okay, for that avatar. But the player is the person sitting there behind the computer with the mouse and the joystick, making all the choices for the avatar.
Gotcha.
See? So, and that player isn't inside the virtual reality. It has to be outside the virtual reality. So
you and I are avatars talking to each other at the moment.
We are avatars, but the mind that is making up the conversation and processing it is consciousness. You see?
So we're still two players in the larger consciousness system.
Exactly. So
our avatars interacting, talking here.
Right.
Zoom. Okay.
So you're an elf and I'm a barbarian in this World of Warcraft multiplayer game, and we're having a conversation about how we're going to go beat the boss in the cave, and we're having a conversation about how to do that. Right. Okay. And there's actually two players somewhere, not necessarily anywhere close. One may be in China and one may be in New York, and one's playing the barbarian and one's playing the elf, and they're having a conversation back and forth about something they're going to do. And so the players are non-physical to the virtual reality, to the avatars. The computer is non-physical from the avatar's point of view. So, and that has to be that way because the player and the computer have to be in the same reality frame because they're interacting with each other all the time.
Gotcha.
You don't interact with things in different reality frames. You interact with things in one reality frame. So player and the computer are non-physical, and they're interacting with each other. The actual virtual reality is just a computation. There are no elves. There really are no elves or barbarians, either one, running around anywhere. They're just computations. And that's the way it is with us. So the virtual reality only exists in the minds of the players. That's an important part. So you see, if World of Warcraft didn't have any players, what would its server be doing? Nothing. Because all that server does is send data streams to players.
If there's no players, no data streams, no interaction, no reality.
Nothing. So a player comes in and out goes a data stream. 10,000 players are playing, there's 10,000 data streams going out. Right. And the system takes all the interactions, and this guy does this and this guy does that, and how does it interact? The computer computes all that stuff and then makes a pretty picture on the screen so that the player can see what's going on. It's a visual aid. And can play it. All right, so that's, our bodies are like that pretty picture on the screen, except we're not on a 2D screen, we're here in a 3D space. And it's the same sort of thing. So what does that tell us? That tells us that this source, this larger conscious system, and the server, it's a piece of that source, and the player, all are non-physical to us. but they also are more fundamental than us. That's how we break this down. So that's how the virtual reality works.
And the individual units of consciousness would be sort of a holographic replica of the large consciousness system?
I wouldn't call it holographic. That's probably not. That's a 3D viewpoint. You're locked into a 3D spatial reality there. No, there's no space in consciousness. Okay. Consciousness doesn't have space.
So it's a self-sufficient term, individuated units of consciousness.
Yeah. So it's just a subset. It's a piece. And sometimes if you really were a person who did computer, if you were a computer science guy, then I would tell you that it's the individuated unit of consciousness is like a virtual machine, a virtual person that is a subset of a larger computer. So the big computer has all kinds of little virtual computers running around that it's doing their own individual things in, but they're all part of this big computer. They're just subsets of it, pieces of it. So we are all one. We're all part of that larger conscious system, but we're also separate. All those subsets are just pieces of the bigger thing, but they are in some ways, they're not fully independent, but they're independent actors. They can do things. They have independent agency.
Our 3D world in which we live currently is but one of many virtual realities.
Yes.
Correctly.
Yes, okay. And there's all sorts of virtual realities. There are virtual realities. I describe them as having a tight rule set, and that's like this physical universe. In other words, our physics and chemistry and biology, those rules are so precise that every single energy exchange is defined, that we call that physical causality. So everything is interactive. If I do something, it affects you,
Cause and effect, yeah.
Yeah, there's just, the effects just ripple out, So if I make a choice, like I'm going to marry Sally instead of marrying Sue, then the fact that I make that choice makes a difference. It makes a difference to me. It makes a difference to Sally. It makes a difference to Sue. It makes a difference to Sally and Sue's parents. It makes a difference to their other boyfriends. That it ripples out. So you make choices, and those choices just flow out and interact with other people. So it's a very interactive game. The computer, of course, computes those interactions, and the players all make choices in those interactions. And the computer basically just gives you eye candy that you look at so you can get a better idea of what it really looks like. So the virtual reality only exists in the minds of the players. No players, no data streams. A player gets a data stream, and it interprets that data stream into the reality. So you look at a megapixel worth of light dots on a monitor, and you turn that million light dots of light into rivers and streams and rocks and elves and barbarians and, swords and all sorts of things. You just take all those light dots and you do an interpretation of what those things are. And you do that based on your experience. You have to have experience. You have to have seen a sword before to say, oh, that's a sword. It needs to be part of your experience base to do that. Well, we do the same thing. So we're getting a data stream. We interpret it in terms of our own history, our own experience base,
perception,
which is also our beliefs, our fears, our ego, our everything. We interpret it that way. So you see, everybody now lives in their own personal reality because everybody's interpretation is a little different because their experience base is a little different.